Hello and welcome to the first episode of Plaintext, a podcast that covers interesting security and privacy related topics in the cryptocurrency ecosystem. We will cover a different technical topic each episode, presenting a plain view of it, or at least as simple as we can make it. In each episode, we aim to include at least one expert guest who is knowledgeable on the subject. Some episodes will be relatively quick if we can cover what we need to cover in a short amount of time. Other episodes may be long to ensure that we cover what we want to cover. So the idea is to cover the information that we want to for any given topic that we have an episode about. Plain Text is published by Magic Grants, a 501c3 public charity that provides scholarships for students interested in cryptocurrencies and privacy, supports public cryptocurrency infrastructure, and promotes privacy. I'm Justin Ehrenhofer, a board member at Magic Grants. I currently work as a testifying expert on matters relating to cryptocurrencies, privacy, and cybersecurity. I previously worked for a self-custodial wallet company, and I previously worked in cryptocurrency compliance. None of the content in here should be considered legal advice or financial advice, and if we learn any new facts or circumstances about the things we talk about, our opinions expressed here may change. I am joined today and will be joined in many episodes with Luke Parker. Hello, Luke.
Hello, it's great to be here for this first episode of the new podcast.
So I know we've done a few things together in the past, quite a few things, but assume there's a brand new listener. Can you give a little bit of background on yourself?
Sure. My name is Luke Parker. I am a developer and amateur cryptographer. I have worked in the Monero ecosystem for the past few years, not only working on Monero's next network upgrade, known as full chain membership proofs plus plus, but I've also worked on my own project, Sarai, a decentralized exchange to swap between Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Monero.
A listener can see why there's so much to talk about with you over the next however many episodes it takes. But today we are discussing generalized bulletproofs. Generalized bulletproofs are zero knowledge proof building blocks of the Monero full chain membership proof plus plus upgrade. Luke made sure I got both the pluses in there, among other uses. With this upgrade, proof sizes increase from a 1 of 16 ring signature to a one of all, the full chain. This substantially increases the privacy of Monero transactions. Luke, can you please give an overview of how we got from bulletproofs, which Monero uses now in some form, technically bulletproofs plus, to generalized bulletproofs?
Of course. So Bulletproofs was published in 2017 or 2018, if I recall correctly. And while it's generally referred to as bulletproofs, there were actually four, you could say even five different proofs contained within the bulletproofs paper. There was the core construction. There was this very piece at the center of bulletproofs, which was known as an inner product argument, or IPA. And we actually don't have to discuss that too much. And then on top of it, they built out more proofs. One of these proofs was a range proof. When you make an output in a Monero transaction, it doesn't specify how much it's sending. Instead, it specifies a commitment, which is perfectly hiding to the amount that's being sent. But in practical terms, there's the issue where you can have an output that would be worth not, 1 Monero, but -1 Monero. And if you send someone -1 Monero, well, then you have 1 Monero to send to someone else, so that the sum of the outputs is 0 Monero. And if you're sending 0 Monero, oh, why would that be an issue? You're not sending more Monero than you have. You're sending 0 Monero. So in practice, we need to ensure that these outputs aren't worth -1 and that they are always actually sending some value to stop exactly this type of issue. And for that, we use a range proof. And the bulletproofs paper did present a range proof, and that range proof resolves as their quote unquote IPA. Then there was also the bulletproofs plus paper, which presented a different IPA, and it also presented its own range proof that reduces down to its inner product argument. So with both these papers, they're of the same idea, just a proof of an inner product argument. And then on top of that, you can do things such as a range proof. Bulletproofs Plus was a tiny bit smaller, which is why the Monero network upgraded from Bulletproofs to Bulletproofs Plus for its range proofs a few years ago. Bulletproofs can be used for other purposes, though, one of them being this quote, arithmetic circuit proof. And arithmetic circuits are really interesting. They're basically expressing a program, like for computers, but as a series of mathematical formulas. And the idea is that instead of proving, oh, this amount, it's not negative, it's just saying, hey, here are some values. They might be amounts within the context of cryptocurrency. It doesn't matter. They're just values which have some certain mathematical definition. And we're just proving that it satisfies all of these properties. And that's really what an arithmetic circuit is. It's just a series of mathematical formulas, and you're just proving that you know some set of values that satisfy all of those formulas. And that is what we're really interested in here today as we discuss generalized bulletproofs. Because while bulletproofs presented this proof for, quote, arithmetic circuits, again, just a program expressed as mathematical formulas, generalized bulletproofs took it a step further. They said that you can do all of the functionality you see with bulletproofs, arithmetic circuit proof, that's all the same, but also you get this additional power. You can now also work with Peterson vector commitments, where Peterson vector commitments are obviously a very mathematical thing. It's basically within the context of elliptic curve cryptography, which is the field of cryptography most protocols today use. It is a way to commit not just to one value, but to a list of values in a way that's perfectly hiding. So if I send you a Peterson vector commitment, there is mathematically no way you can determine what values are committed to within it. However, I, who created the Peterson vector commitment, can of course say, yes, here are the list of values that I committed to within this commitment. And that's useful for a variety of different purposes, not only within academia, as a itself as a building block, a way to commit to a random number without revealing the random number, for example. But also the specific construction of Peterson vector commitments has many uses, and it also has uses for Monero. So all generalized bulletproofs is really doing is it's taking bulletproofs, the arithmetic circuit proof, and it's adding in the ability to work with Peterson vector commitments.
Great. And to get to generalized bulletproofs, can you talk more about how those specifically came to be?
Right. So generalized bulletproofs was first, let's go with mentioned. It was first mentioned in the curve trees paper. There was this paper a few years ago titled Curve Trees, where curve trees were a way to prove membership in a set, which is of course very similar in idea to ring signatures. With ring signatures, you say, oh, we have a ring of people. Right now, today with Monero, we have 16 people in a ring. And a ring signature says, I am one of these 16 people, but I am not telling you which one of these 16 I am. And curve trees does something similar. It says, oh, I am one of these people in this set, but I am not telling you which of these people I am. The advantage of the curve trees construction is that with a ring, you have to specify each member of the set, but with curve trees, um, you don't have to specify each member of the set. So with Monero, which has over 100 million outputs on chain, it would be infeasible to create a ring signature for all 100 million outputs. Um, is it 100 million or 10 million? I believe it's 100 million, but apologies if I'm off by a zero there. But with curve trees, it represents things differently, and that discussion becomes possible. Hence why full chain membership proofs is able to discuss moving from 16 outputs to the entire blockchain. So generalized bulletproofs was mentioned in the curve trees paper, um, but it was more of just we have this efficient way to prove membership in a set, and we use this proof to do it. But this proof actually wasn't published as its own paper or in extensive detail in the curve trees paper or anywhere else. And if you looked into it, the curve trees paper did come with a reference implementation that they use for benchmarking. And that reference implementation did include an implementation of this generalized bulletproofs. And they also did write up some of the mathematics behind it, where they said, of course, oh, well, the bulletproofs arithmetic circuit proof that becomes an inner product argument in this expansion. And what we want to do is we want to add this extra functionality. And here's how that new expansion would look like. And of course, be provable with the bulletproof's inner product argument. But despite providing a reference implementation and despite mentioning it in their paper, their description of it, their write up, was still rather this very abstract mathematical take on it. So that's where the protocol came from.
How did you come across it the first time? I mean, you were putting together a lot of the different pieces together for Monero to be able to implement full chain membership proofs plus plus,
Mhm.
and you saw this generalized bulletproof component and said, "Hey, this would be interesting." Can you talk a little bit about that story of
Yeah.
how you came across it? I guess a little bit
So
of the history there.
at the time, Monero was discussing the Seraphis um, upgrade, which at the time was planned for Monero, though now full chain membership proofs plus plus has become our focus. So the Seraphis upgrade would have achieved largely the same goals as the full chain membership proofs plus plus upgrade, although in a different way and with a different methodology. One of the main sticking points is that it would have been a migration. Users would have outputs on Monero today, and they would have to explicitly migrate them to be Seraphis outputs, and they would have new Seraphis addresses, and so on. While in comparison, full chain membership proofs plus plus maintains compatibility with all existing addresses. Um, but as part of Seraphis requiring this migration, it proposed this really elegant system and this clear breakdown of components and responsibilities that was what justified the migration because this separation and this delineation offered a lot of functionality and worthwhile features. So one of the Seraphis components was a membership proof that could have been a proof that, I'm a member of a ring, somewhat as we see today in Monero, or it could have been a larger ring with a more efficient proof that was originally proposed for Seraphis. Seraphis was proposed to use a ring of roughly size 128 as possible with this more efficient proof that would have been enabled via Seraphis. Or also, Seraphis could have used a quote full chain membership proof. So the original proposal for full chain membership proofs was for the Seraphis upgrade, which made an explicit spot that full chain membership proofs could fit into. And for the Seraphis upgrade, the full chain membership proofs proposal was effectively the curve trees proof adapted for use in Monero. So it wasn't so much that we found generalized bulletproofs and decided to use them. It's that we found curve trees and decided to use curve trees with Seraphis. And then later, while discussing full chain membership proofs for Seraphis, one idea was full chain membership proofs, but for Monero today. And that didn't immediately work because Seraphis gave us the place to put a full chain membership proof, and Monero today didn't, which is one of the reasons why we wanted to upgrade to Seraphis. But as part of wondering, could we apply full chain membership proofs to Monero today? That is where the innovations came up that allowed extending full chain membership proofs into full chain membership proofs plus plus, where the plus plus represents the additional functionality, which allows us to add full chain membership proofs to Monero today and complete the rest of the expectations and functionality.
That I appreciate you providing that background. I know that
Mhm.
those individual components are going to be topics for other episodes, but it's good to see how these all link together when you're trying to play with these different pieces in order to have an ultimate good working protocol. And it's certainly nice that we don't need to require users to have a hard migration to a completely different set of funds, basically, like what was originally posited with the Seraphis upgrade. So
Of
yeah,
course.
that's cool background.
Yeah.
Just getting back a little more to generalized bulletproofs specifically. Why was the functionality that was described in generalized bulletproofs to do the broader set of things functionally important for Monero? Like, what does Monero do now with bulletproofs plus, and why is that not possible
Right.
when Monero moves to FCMP plus plus?
Of course. So, as I said earlier, the bulletproofs arithmetic circuit is different from the generalized bulletproofs, and that one supports Peterson vector commitments and one does not. And this is actually really important to the curve trees construction. The basic idea with the curve trees function is one that's been seen a lot in, privacy preserving cryptocurrency and similar. Whereas with a ring, you list every member of the ring. One other idea is to use a construction known as a Merkle tree. And with a Merkle tree, you don't list every member, which of course, if you have 100 million members, that would be a very, very long list, which is
It'd
not
be
feasible
super
to do.
efficient to include a whole blockchain in every transaction you're trying to send. Yeah.
Of course. So the idea with the Merkle tree is that you can create literally a tree. And you only have to ask yourself at each step, are you going left or are you going right? And if you're going, so if you have, just 128. Oh, that's a bit large for the example. Let's say for the example, it's just eight. If you have eight members, well, you put four of them on the left and you put four of them on the right. And you ask, oh, are you going left or right? And then you say, oh, well, now you have four in front of you. Let's put two on the left and two on the right, left or right again. And then after one more time, you get to the one specific member that you want. But instead of going over all eight members of the set, you just have to ask yourself left or right three times. Or obviously, three is much smaller than eight. But as the scales, if you have 128 members, well, now you only have to ask yourself left or right seven times. And if you have 100 million, you only have to ask it approximately 24 times, I want to say off the top of my head, but I have to stop for a moment to revisit the powers of two. But basically, for even a set as large as 100 million or so, you just have to put half of them on the left, half of them on the right, and do this about 24 times, which is obviously much more efficient and practical. And when we discuss, oh, only doing this 24 times, that's similar to doing a ring where we have 16 members and doing the step 16 times. So now the question is, of course, well, that sounds great. How do we actually instantiate this Merkle tree? And at the core of it is going to be a hash function, where a hash function is a cryptographic primitive that takes a bunch of outputs or takes a bunch of inputs and spits out an output. And the really important property of the hash function is that no matter for what inputs we give it, you should always get a distinct output. You should not be able to find multiple distinct inputs that give you the same output, which is a property called collision resistance. It is hard to find inputs whose outputs collide. So there's a lot of hash functions that we use with computers. I would say most famously would be, of course, SHA-2 or SHA-256, the 256-bit SHA-2. But these hash functions are very slow to work with inside of zero knowledge proofs. So it's not that Monero couldn't use a Merkle tree, and it's not that it couldn't have a Merkle tree which uses SHA-2 for a hash function. It would just be very, very slow. And of course, that's the issue. So then there are also what are known as arithmetic hash functions. While most hash functions are written to be fast for computers, arithmetic hash functions are written to be fast within zero knowledge proofs, more or less the gist of it. And arithmetic hash functions are discussed a lot because the research on them has only really come to the center of focus in, say, the past 10 years or so with the rising adoption of zero knowledge proofs. Um, and a lot of them are much newer than the hash functions that we generally use for computers. And because of that, there's a lot of discussions about their security and about their efficiency. And while they are much faster to work with in zero knowledge proofs, they do still have a non trivial computational cost. So the really genius thing about curve trees was they said, what if we use Peterson vector commitments as a hash function? Because as I said earlier, Peterson vector commitments let you take a list of elements, such as the inputs to your hash function, and it outputs the Peterson vector commitment, where no one can see what the values were, but you, because you created it and you know the values, you can say, yes, these are the inputs for that Peterson vector commitment. So it very naturally creates a hash function. And not only that, but while hash functions are frequently discussed about how secure they are, and there are options I would consider secure, but still we would have to be very careful about the exact selection and the parameters we use. For the Peterson vector commitment, the security of it relates to the discrete log problem, which is this problem in cryptography that effectively all of Monero already assumes. So we aren't assuming, oh, we require this newer hash function, and if this breaks, then all of Monero breaks, and it only breaks if it is special and is secure. But we don't really know if it is, except we're studying it, and people have been studying it the past few years, and it hasn't broken yet. No, instead of that, we're just relying on existing assumptions in Monero. This new hash function, due to us at least, the Peterson vector commitment has existed for decades. It is secure so long as everything else we're already doing in Monero is secure. So it's really great that we don't have any security concerns with it. And also, because generalized bulletproofs give us the ability to work with Peterson vector commitments, we get really incredibly cheap operations with it to the degree that they can almost be considered free. So not only do we have the secure hash function, but we have a very minimal performance cost, or even arithmetic hash functions would have a non-trivial performance cost. And then, of course, legacy hash functions would have a very notable computational cost, which is why it's so important to have generalized bulletproofs, which has this native near free operations with Peterson vector commitments.
I want to get back into more efficiency specific discussions later. I know there are other things to talk about, but before getting straight into more efficiency related things, I want to talk more about how Monero and you and other researchers took this curve tree paper and the generalized bulletproof construction as it was sketched and adapted it to a proper safe implementation. Can you talk a little about that process, getting from that really high level theory to what Monero could actually use?
Right. Um, so in the earlier discussions, we actually discussed, well, we've already upgraded from bulletproofs to bulletproofs plus. Would it make sense to discuss generalized bulletproofs plus, like this further optimization? And we spent some time on that and it didn't work out. But we ended up going with yes, we want to use generalized bulletproofs. We don't want to quote unquote upgrade it from bulletproofs to bulletproofs plus, as we've done with our range proofs. We just want to move forward with generalized bulletproofs, which did not present like the protocol. It didn't say, here's the exact set of steps you do. It just said, here's our implementation of it, and here's the idea of the math behind it.
Real
So
quick,
we,
can you talk? I remember the discussions back in the day about making bulletproofs plus for generalized bulletproofs. I know I'm kind of butchering it there, but like, Can you summarize why that didn't work? What happened there?
Well, they basically, as we were discussing adopting this proof, which itself wasn't entirely specified, so we had to put in the legwork. And if we were already putting in the legwork, we were discussing, could we make this improvement? Um, or would this even be an improvement? That was one of the things we discussed, and it just did not work out because the original bulletproofs arithmetic circuit proof very naturally extended to support Peterson vector commitments. It was already very proximate. And in fact, if you don't read the bulletproofs paper as published on sites such as the IACR ePrint server, but if you actually open Benedict Bunz's uh, thesis, which includes bulletproofs, there is one extra proof in it. It's not present in the version on the IECR ePrint server, but it is in his thesis. And his extra version actually does include a vector commitment. Benedict Bunz, who is, I would say, the primary person behind Bulletproofs, even though there's many authors who contributed to it. Um, in his thesis, he already said how you could extend the bulletproof arithmetic circuit proof to support a vector commitment. So it already had this very close proximity to vector commitments. Generalized bulletproofs didn't just add one vector commitment, but allowed us to arbitrarily work with vector commitments. But in contrast, Bulletproofs Plus, well, it was a lot of the same ideas. You have this inner product argument, you have this arithmetic circuit proof on top, and you can layer them as such. And anything you could do with a bulletproof, you can do with a Bulletproof Plus. While all that was true, that doesn't change that there was a way to expand the original bulletproofs to include this extra functionality. And there wasn't really a way to expand Bulletproofs Plus to do the same. Because despite how on the surface they did the same, the way they worked internally, yes, had greatly changed in order for Bulletproofs Plus to claim to be so more efficient. Um, and with that, it lost its ability to be extended in this way. So that's why we focused on generalized bulletproofs. And while we did have legwork ahead, and we did discuss doing the legwork on a more efficient version because we're already putting the work in, we decided to move forward with generalized bulletproofs as bulletproofs.
Got it. Makes sense. So yeah, circling back to the prior thing. um,
The
again,
the
you had
legwork ahead.
yes. Let's get back to the work.
Yeah.
So you had
So
you had these proof sketches, and then you had to build them out. Talk through that process a bit.
yeah, so I'm not even sure if we would say we had proof sketches because we had an implementation and we had the reasoning for the math behind it. And we at the time were talking with Aaron Fikert, who was at CipherStack. And we were also talking with some people from other communities as well, such as Firo and Sano, who were also interested in the potential of full chain membership proofs. And I believe Firo actually contributed some of the hours to researching, generalized bulletproofs and even the theoretical generalized bulletproofs plus. But regardless, when this idea and the math that they had written out about how this can be done and reduces to the inner product, when that was shown to Aaron Fikert, um, who was at CipherStack, Aaron very clearly said, "Oh yes, I see what they're talking about and how what they're trying to do." So I don't want to say that they didn't present the generalized bulletproofs protocol and the idea of it. However, as I described myself earlier as an amateur cryptographer. Better term may be a cryptographic engineer. I'm someone who has a lot of experience engineering cryptography and working with it, but I'm not formally uh, trained on cryptography. And while I actually have designed some protocols and those have been published, which I'm very proud of, my experience is more with the protocols themselves rather than the security proofs and the mathematical reasoning for them. So when I saw the math, I said, I am a developer. At no point does this tell me what to do. It just says, here's a bunch of math that explains what you can do. Well, what do you do? So I'm not sure if I would call it a proof sketch versus the math behind it. But when we showed it to Aaron, Aaron did seem to quickly understand what it was saying, what you can do. And of course, because Aaron understood that, Aaron was able to present the protocol as I would need it to implement it and present the actual implementation as code for use in Monero and so on. So Aaron put together a document containing the actual protocol, not just here's the idea of the math, but here's the literal steps you would take to implement this. And they also put forward the security proofs, where the security proofs is how you argue, yes, this is actually secure. Here's a proof of its security. And that was work Aaron Fiker did while at CipherStack. We then contacted Brandon Goodall for review of these proofs. They reviewed them, and at the time, Brandon said that they believe the security proofs for generalized bulletproofs would hold so long as the proofs for bulletproofs would hold. Obviously, bulletproofs is elliptic curve cryptography, and it relies on the discrete log problem I mentioned earlier, among a variety of other things, and it uses certain techniques. And at the time, the comment was, yes, these should be as good as bulletproofs are. And obviously, Monero was already using bulletproofs, at least historically. So because we had confidence in bulletproofs, we were able to move forward with this work, generalized bulletproofs, as formalized and proven by Aaron. So I proceeded with the implementation of generalized bulletproofs as part of the effort as a whole for full chain membership proofs and full chain membership proofs plus plus. And then that was audited by Aaron Fikert at one point, who not only did the formalization, but also is a Rust developer and had experience with the programming language that all of this was implemented in, Rust. So we did even get this audited, and that put us in a very good spot, at least we believed at the time, because we had the proofs, we had it reviewed, we had it implementation, and of course we had the implementation audited. And that was, I want to say, roughly at the start of 2025.
Yeah, if I'm checking my notes here, it looks like Aaron published the first security proofs for GBPs in May of 2024. At least that's when the document was published to
Mhm.
GitHub. And then there was an update to the document in January 2025. So
That would
around
have
that time,
coincided with the audit, yes.
got it, got it. Okay, so that makes sense. And then yeah, I mean, you're kind of alluding to the fact that there was an issue. Um, but there was an issue. So in late 2025, Brandon Goodell and I believe the rest of the CypherStack team, Brandon's the one who's listed on the document that describes an issue and a fix for it. But I believe the
Mhm.
other CypherStack team members were also involved in the
Uh,
construction of the document.
just this one interjection. The security proofs for this were done by Aaron Fikert while at CipherStack, and then Brandon did his review. Brandon Goodell was not at CipherStack at the time. That's why he was the independent reviewer chosen. But later, Brandon Goodell joined CipherStack. Hence why when we now discuss this work in late 2025, we do say Brandon Goodell at CipherStack along with the other cryptographers at CipherStack.
Yeah, that's a good clarifying question. I think the other two cryptographers at CipherStack are there after Aaron left as well. So it's like, even
Mhm.
though it's also CipherStack, it's a group of different people. So that is kind of funny in that
Yeah.
sense. It's a little bit
I just,
confusing,
of
but
course, wanted to clarify we didn't have one cryptographer publish it and then one cryptographer who was at the same company next to him do the review. No, we did have one cryptographer do it and then a distinct entity, though the first one then left the company and the second one then joined the company. So,
totally normal, totally straightforward, makes sense to me.
but
But yeah, late
yes, we did
2025,
have
you mentioned
independent review.
yeah.
Yeah.
In late 2025, Brandon Goodell and the other CyberTech team members were looking at the GBP proofs again, and they observed an error with the original GBP proofs. They later published a fix for that in January 2026, and there's a revision of that fix document that came out in April 2026. Um, Luke, I know that you were involved in discussions with them about the discovery of the issue, and then some discussions about how to fix it. Can you talk about what happened with both of those things?
Sure. So for the original generalized bulletproofs, when it was formalized and proven by Aaron, there's actually a couple different versions posted. And by a couple, I mean literally about a couple, because there was one version that did one trade-off and another version that took the other side of the coin on that trade-off. And that's also why the document was actually updated in January 2025, coinciding with the audit, because the version that was implemented was actually a different side of the coin than the one in the originally published document. So when Aaron did the audit of the implementation, which took the other side of that trade-off, they updated their formalization to cover the other side of it. So the two were in sync, which was very generous and appreciated for them to do. Um, so what the trade-off was about was whether or not you can use, let's say, half of the commitments. um, Basically, for these Peterson vector commitments, when we discuss them in the proof, like obviously as humans, we can just say it's a commitment to a list of values, and that's true. But when we discuss them in the proof, we kind of discuss them as two different lists. We discuss it as a list over G and a list over H. And the technical details don't really matter too much here, but this is the starting point of this discussion. One version of generalized bulletproofs allowed you to use both the list over G and the list over H. So you could put you could fully utilize both lists. And then the other version of generalized bulletproofs, it only let you use the list over G. So one of them gave you twice as many spots within your commitment for how much data you could put in there. And that sounds great. Why would you use a commitment to a list when you can use a commitment to two lists? That's twice as many lists. But it came with the trade-off that the proof itself ended up as bigger. Because in order to support using both of these lists, part of the proof itself had to be rearranged. And while you got twice as much data per commitment, which let you use half as many commitments, the proof itself was basically twice as expensive per commitment. So it didn't really actually save any space, especially because for some of our commitments, we already aren't making the most of them. But despite not making the most of them, we would still have to pay the tax to be able to use both lists. It's a bit messy. But the reason this matters is because in late 2025, Brendan Goodall at CipherStack, and presumably with, of course, the other researchers at CipherStack, they identified that this other list exists that we knew about, but we just ignored it. We didn't use it because it gave us smaller proofs if we ignored it. And they said, yes, you're ignoring it, but that doesn't mean other people have to ignore it. And if other people use it regardless, there are security issues with the proof. So our question became about, okay, we knew that these two lists existed, but we only wanted to use the G list. We didn't care for the H list. But how do we ensure people aren't using this second list? Or rather, that if they are using the second list, it isn't an issue and doesn't cause issues for us. And this led to a few different discussions, because there's actually a few different ways that you can prove that the list isn't being used. And if what we would say the adversary, the person who's trying to cause security issues and break the proof, if we can prove that they aren't using the H list, then we don't have to worry about what if they are using the H list. We just have to prove that they aren't in the first place. So that led to a couple of proposals, and some of them are quite interesting. One of them would have really hurt verification time, but it wouldn't have changed the proof size at all. Um, if, of course, it was correct. It was a proposal. I'm not saying that this definitely could have happened and been implemented, but one of the proposals, it would have really messed with verification time, but it actually would have kept the proof size about the same. Then another proposal was for not changing the generalized bulletproofs themselves. We wouldn't have changed them, we would have added on another proof. And that other proof would have said, hey, there is this H list, but it isn't being used. And that would have, plugged the hole in generalized bulletproofs. It would have been, yep, there's a hole in generalized bulletproofs. We're not going to fix that. We're just going to use this other proof to plug the gap. And the advantage of that is that sounds silly or even insecure to not fix the underlying issue in the generalized bulletproofs. But the reason for that approach would have been we could use a very specific proof to prove that these generators aren't being, or to prove that this list isn't being used. And because we can make a very specific proof of that, we can also use a very efficient proof for that exact statement. Hey, we don't need you to do all of these things. We just need you to prove that this list is not being used, that it's empty. And because we can get a very efficient proof of that, it actually would have been a very small additional cost. And I think would have been pleasant for the verification times and proof sizes. But it also would have been annoying because now instead of one proof, you have two proofs and you have to argue that they're secure together and you have to implement both of them. And then there was the proposal that ended up being the one specified. This proposal was to um, properly add support for the H list. And as I said earlier, we wanted to ignore the H list because it gave us a smaller proof size. But with this proposal, yes, we would have to handle the H list, and that would mean growing the proof size. Unfortunately, not only do we have to grow the proof size to handle the H list, but we also don't actually get to use it. It exists, and it can't be used to, attack the proof, but it also can't be used to the benefit of the proof. It just exists, and is technically supported. Um, so it's kind of, the worst of both worlds. Not only is the proof somewhat bigger, because we have to pay for it, we also don't get to take advantage of it. But it was a very straightforward fix. Instead of handling certain arrangements and indexes as we did prior, we just added extra indexes. Instead of saying, here's the first list, here's the second list, we now basically say, here's the first list, G, and then here's the first list, H. So we give it two indexes instead of one. And with those adjustments made, which was really simple to do in the code, the proof as a whole worked. Not only did the proof as a whole work, but it didn't require composition with this other proof in order to be secure. Nope, it was just secure by itself, which was great. And there was also some optimizations detailed to it and some descriptions, which were actually quite pleasant for how they compare to the original Bulletproofs paper and how there's some academic relations there, which really help justify and explain what the modern generalized Bulletproofs protocol is. But the one downside to the proposed fix, which has now been implemented, sorry, to the proposed and specified fix, which has now been implemented, is that it did have larger proof sizes than we would have hoped for. I think they ended up being roughly 30% bigger. And maybe that could have been better. Maybe if we did use a second proof that was separate but dedicated to this purpose, maybe it only would have been, 20%, not 30%. Um, but despite that, this was a very straightforward fix and it was easy to implement, and the security arguments for it are much more straightforward. So we can definitely appreciate those aspects and understand why this was the proposal that was specified and proven secure.
So just to make sure I understand, before the issue was identified and then the fix suggested and applied, were you taking a shortcut to ignore one of those lists before and you thought that that was acceptable and then it ended up not being? I just want to make sure I understand the high level there.
Uh, yeah, somewhat. For the version that Aaron worked on, we could ignore this list, or we could have this list but pay an extra cost to handle it. We decided just to ignore it, and we thought that was fine. What the team at CipherStack identified is that no, that was not fine. You do have to handle this list. But instead of handling this list and being able to use it, the final version handles this list, but unfortunately, we still don't get to use it. So actually, both versions that we discussed back in the day, for either side of the coin, neither of those would have worked. And for this new version, we not only handle the list, but we also don't get to use it, which is a bit unfortunate, and is why it's a larger proof than we would have hoped for. By that,
Um,
I think I said 30% or so.
yeah, in theory, if later down the line, let's say Monero is stuck with this FCMP protocol when implemented for a few years, if Monero wished to look in to try and get this extra 10%, I mean, hopefully that there are plenty of other better places to get performance improvements. But if Monero goes down the route of trying to chase that additional 10-ish% or so with the more efficient proof, would it be possible to circle back around and try to replace that one particular component relatively simply, or would it be a huge mess to try and swap out that part later?
Right. So, as you said at the start, the generalized bulletproofs are a building block of the FCMP plus protocol. And one of the great things about that is that, yes, we can put any block into the generalized bulletproof shaped hole. And as part of that, if we do have a more efficient generalized bulletproofs, as long as it does the same thing, we can just upgrade to it. That was even seen, with Monero and its range proofs. As discussed earlier, we used bulletproofs for a range proof, and then bulletproofs plus came around and were more efficient. So we were able to move to bulletproofs plus, and that was a very straightforward upgrade there. Here, while we said that there were generalized bulletproofs, and upgrading to generalized bulletproofs plus didn't really make sense, upgrading to one of these other proposals or maybe new proposals in the future, yeah, as long as they function the same, we are able to swap out these internals. So in the
Got it.
future, yes, we can definitely look to be anywhere from 10% smaller to even if more notable proposals come forward. If someone says, oh, actually, you can be 50% faster. Yeah, we could definitely look and discuss those. And if the time and effort to work on them, make sure they're secure, ensure the cryptography is safe, as we hope and expect. Because obviously here with generalized bulletproofs, they had quite the review process, and then an issue was found, and now we're continuing with discussions and review and audits and so on. So it's obviously non-trivial, and to discuss any upgrade, we would again have to go through this process. But if someone made the proposal, and if we went through this process, we would definitely be able to upgrade.
Yeah, it's good for people to know that there is an option, even if it is not the priority at the moment.
Mhm.
And it makes sense to pick the easier to prove, justify process, even if it's slightly slower. For the range of 10%, it's not hugely significant compared to, for example, divisors. Topic for another episode. Okay, yeah, thanks for that background. Just to give credit to a few of the other reviewers at CipherStack, some of the new members that joined and performed that review, they included Freeman Slaughter and Luke uh, Zramowski, and then just to name the original authors of the Curve Tree paper, Matteo Campanelli, Matthias Hall Anderson, and Simon Holmgard Kamp. So there's a lot of people involved in making this work, even if they all weren't interested solely at the Monero angle. um,
Yeah, and I
so
think, of course, we can now discuss, now that the team at CipherStack has put forward this fix and formalized it, and that's been implemented. I think we can now move to discussing how we're handling the academic review of this fix to make sure this fixed version is good.
yeah, so on that note, Magic Grants is directly involved. So we talked with the Monero Research Lab, and of course, Luke, we talked about this a bunch of times, to find a reviewer that would be competent to review uh, these updated generalized bulletproof proofs and the implementation associated with that. And so Magic Grants, just very recently, the week in May 2026, signed ZK Security to perform a review of the proofs and the implementation of these. And so these are set to be reviewed in June 2026. One of the reviewers is Matthias Hall Anderson, who was one of the authors of the Curve Tree paper. So you can see why it's kind of a small world here, but it's good to have that type of expertise involved in this kind of third stage review, but really the second stage of the fixes that were proposed for the GBP proofs.
Yes, having someone who's obviously experienced with bulletproofs and even made the original proposal for generalized proofs to come back and see what we hope to be the finished and final product. And again, agree that yes, this is what we should be moving forward with.
I wish that they find another issue and we have to keep going back and forth for another 12 years. Um, let's hope
I,
they
I
don't.
would like to see the full chain membership proof plus upgrade finally go live and offer its privacy to the Monero community.
Of course, of course. If something's wrong, I'd love to know, but I do hope nothing's wrong at this point.
Yes.
Um, all right. So you mentioned that generalized bullet proofs are a generalized zero knowledge proof, and they can be used for other things, not just Monero's use case. I mean, this curve tree paper was not put together, as far as I'm aware, for the intended purpose that Monero use it, right? Specifically. So what other good use cases might there be for generalized bulletproofs? And does anybody else besides Monero use generalized bulletproofs?
Yeah, so the Curve Trees paper may have cited Monero because one of the main advertisements for Curve Trees was how it's a transparent proof of membership. There are a lot of proofs of membership used in protocols such as Zcash Sprout or Zcash Sapling. Not their latest protocol, Zcash Orchard, but for Sprout and Sapling, they use zero knowledge proofs and they had a quote trusted setup where individuals had to perform the setup protocol. And if all of them colluded, then they could forge proofs. They could claim to be members when they were not actually members. And of course, this has a minimized trust assumption, and that if even one participant in the protocol was honest, this isn't a concern. And many other protocols have used these proofs, which generally are referred to as having a trusted setup. Whereas with curve trees, it's referred to as having a transparent setup, which means that no, there's no special setup process. There's no private keys that must be erased for the proof to be secure. It's a completely transparent process, and there's no additional trust assumptions. And that's not only great, of course, for being transparent, which is a property that's incredibly important to Monero. Monero, in all discussions involving using proofs that require trusted setups, they were always rejected. Policy I agree with. Um, but it also removes one piece of complexity. There was this famous issue with the original trusted setup used by Zcash, where they were supposed to erase the private keys. And it's not that the participants didn't, it's that they marked this one piece of data, which effectively was a private key. Um, they publicly exported it, not necessarily to be malicious. They followed the paper, and the paper said to do that. The paper was just wrong about that. It was not a public key. It was effectively a private key. And it did allow breaking the trusted setup because, in effect, despite how all the people involved did it honestly, um, they left one piece of data in that shouldn't have been there. So not only is a transparent setup great for being transparent, it also just removes, one less thing that can break, which is one of the things I appreciate. So because the curve trees paper was about a transparent proof of membership, it may have cited Monero, which of course uses transparent proof of memberships, currently the ring signatures. Um, but no, it wasn't meant for Monero. And it built on generalized bulletproofs, which is an arithmetic circuit proof, similar to how the bulletproofs had an arithmetic circuit proof for anyone and everyone to use. I don't know if people use the bulletproofs, the original paper's arithmetic circuit proof. I know a lot of proposals discussed using it, but I'm not sure if anyone did, because in comparison to a lot of zero knowledge proofs with trusted setups, when you use a trusted setup, you generally get very, very low cost verification. Sometimes it's even constant complexity verification. That means even if the proof is, over the entire library of Alexandria, this massive amount of data, the verifier can always verify it in a few milliseconds. Doesn't matter how big your input is. But in contrast with bulletproofs, it's a linear proof. The time to verify the proof is linear to how much data it's handling. So because of this, the bulletproof's arithmetic circuit proof, it actually isn't great for large amounts of data. So I'm not really sure if it caught on as presented. even if the techniques have been very widely discussed and expanded upon over the years for what it's contributed to the field. So with generalized bulletproofs and its evolution of the arithmetic circuit, it again has the same issue where the proofs are actually, if you have a large program, the proofs can quickly become very slow. And the innovation of curve trees was that it presented a very small program. Despite the complexity of the task, because of the Peterson vector commitment functionality and because of what it offered a very small program, which made it acceptable to use this transparent proof as we want, which, yes, technically was slow for large programs. Just don't have a large program, and it's great. Um, so with the implementation that Monero's using and that I myself wrote, the library for generalized bulletproofs is as formalized over the years, initially by Aaron and now by the team at CipherStack. And the reason for that is, of course, so it matches the paper. And so we can review it. We can look at this library and confirm it matches the paper. Then when we implement exact use cases on top, like full chain membership proofs, which is an adaptation of curve trees. It's the same methodology, and it shares a lot of the pieces, but it's been adapted for Monero's specific use case, and also we've optimized it somewhat with a specific technique known as divisors. Um, for the generalized bulletproofs library, we've actually built on top of it something called the Generalized Bulletproofs Circuit Abstraction Library. While generalized bulletproofs, as I said earlier, is a proof of arithmetic circuits, it's still very mathematical. So what the circuit abstraction library does is it just transforms it into more something that looks closer like a program. You get a more traditional way to declare variables and assign relationships. And then it's this abstraction layer, which transforms, oh, here's a variable, here's how it's being used, into the actual mathematical definitions that the underlying proof uses. And that's, again, really great to audit because if the generalized bulletproof is valid, we can trust that to be valid. And now for this abstraction layer, it isn't doing this entire massive scope of the full chain membership proof. It just takes in an input, applies a specific set of transformations, and passes an output to generalized bulletproofs. So again, it's really direct to review because of its clear delineation of where its responsibilities begin and where it ends, allowing us to very neatly and nicely compose all of this code and functionalities, which is very important to ensure that the result is secure and that one library didn't assume something would handle something and then the other library assumed the first library would handle that something. No, you really want to ensure you know who's doing what, when, and where. We also have a library for, quote, elliptic curve gadgets. Um, as part of these proofs, we do have to do some elliptic curve cryptography. And there's a library just for this elliptic curve cryptography as more building blocks. We have the building block of the proof, building block of the abstraction on top, and a building block on some elliptic curve cryptography helpers. And all of that culminates into Monero's specific use case of full chain membership proofs, but it is generally usable. And I would love to see if other people would be able to use this and extend it because it is its own framework for working with arithmetic circuits and a zero knowledge proof. I am proud of the implementation. Obviously, the transparent setup is very valuable to protocols and communities. The implementation itself is quite efficient. Um, and it is intended not only to be delineated for Monero's own security, but also well documented and with very clearly defined APIs as naturally enables other people to use it. And if other people use it, obviously we would get their review and potentially even their contributions. As for actual users of it, I'm only aware of one at this time, which is my other project, Sarai. Sarai uses generalized bulletproofs as part of a, quote, distributed key generation protocol, which is a very different thing. But as part of this distributed key generation protocol, we needed a zero knowledge proof and we needed to work with elliptic curve cryptography. which is exactly what the full chain membership proofs needed. It needed a zero knowledge proof, and it needed to work with this elliptic curve cryptography for part of it. So because there was already this work done for full chain membership proofs, and because there were already these libraries defined and built out, in order for Sarai to also use a zero knowledge proof that also had these features on top of it, it Sarai was quickly able to integrate this work on generalized bulletproofs and take advantage for a completely different purpose, for performing a distributed key generation, which is, where you have, say, three people in a group of five who want to create a private key. So they sample random numbers and they do what's known as secret sharing. So each participant does receive a share of the group's private key. So obviously a very different use case to full chain membership proofs, but because these libraries were so written and because they had so many building blocks in common, they were able to be used as such. And I'd hope other people who want or need zero knowledge proofs, for which this is a good fit, are aware of our work and able to adopt it themselves.
In terms of broader users of bulletproofs, I believe Mimblewimble and all the things that build on that use bulletproofs for their
Yeah,
constructions. That would be like
so
Tari, Litecoin, and others, right?
yeah, a variety of projects from Mimblewimble as seen in Grin or as seen in Mimblewimble coin or Beam or Litecoin, which somewhat has Mimblewimble. Um, they do use bulletproofs, but they specifically use the bulletproofs range proof. As I said at the start, proving that when you're sending an amount, you're not sending a negative amount. Um, I don't know of projects that actually use the arithmetic circuit aspect of it. I do, of course, know that, as I said at the start as well, there's the range proof and the arithmetic circuit proof, which are ways to use the core construction at the heart of bulletproofs, what's known as the inner product argument, which has had notable effects on literature over the years. The inner product argument actually has been used by other protocols. I believe Zcash's Halo protocol, which is the basis for Orchard. I don't know if that specifically uses the bulletproofs inner product argument, but I believe it's descended from at least that line of academia. And then, of course, they introduced Halo 2, which was the Halo zero knowledge proof, and they're still using the similar IPA. Again, I don't know if it's specifically bulletproof's inner product argument or just another one that they've derived. Um, but Halo 2 offered much more efficient operations, and on the surface would allow writing much smaller programs that can be verified much faster. So that's a real benefit to the Halo 2 proof if it meets your needs. Um, and then I also believe that some people are using inner product arguments as a building block of other proofs. Like again, as I said, the inner product argument can be used for the range proof, it can be used for the arithmetic circuit, it can be used for generalized bulletproofs, which is the arithmetic circuit with Peterson vector commitments. It can also be used for other purposes. I believe the team over at Mina, who do a lot of work with zero knowledge proofs, somewhat for the point of, I would say, compression. It's very interesting. Instead of giving you the whole blockchain with an entire, several years of proofs, the idea is they can give you just the result of the blockchain and a single zero knowledge proof that attests to the entire history of the blockchain and confirms that it occurred correctly. That's why I said kind of like compression. I believe they also, for some of their work, use an inner product argument, but I'd have to check. So the bulletproofs as a range proof has definitely been used, and as an inner product argument has definitely contributed to academia and be used in further proofs and constructions, as we see here with generalized bulletproofs. But I don't actually know anyone who discussed using the arithmetic circuit construction and actually moved forward with it. I believe that while I've seen proposals for that, none actually went forward.
Okay, thanks for explaining that. That definitely helps
Mhm.
understand the delineations a little bit better there. Um, So we're nearing the end here. A bit of a broader question. For Monero's use case with FCMP++, were generalized bulletproofs the only option that was considered, or were there other potential contenders that you're trying to piece together to make that work, or other different ways to try and approach the similar task that generalized bulletproofs serve in the Monero FCMP++ protocol?
Yeah, so I would say like at its core, we need a zero knowledge proof for an arithmetic circuit. And I really think we did need this Peterson vector commitment functionality. Because the reason that curve trees was so efficient is because they were able to use the Peterson vector commitment as a hash function and just very, very cheaply work with that hash function. And that was the real breakthrough. It wasn't that their zero knowledge proofs were necessarily faster or smaller. It's just because of this functionality, they got such an efficient program that even with the performance overhead of the zero knowledge proof, it was still such a small program. It ended up in being a very fast proof in the end. In contrast with the work Zcash did on Orchard, which is their private transaction protocol that uses transparent proofs. They did, as I said, Halo and Halo 2, which achieved a lot of great performance properties, and they've really optimized their zero knowledge proof. And also, they optimized their program, of course, and one of the way they optimized their program was historically for Zcash's Sprout and Saplink protocols. They did use classical hash functions that are very traditional for computers, but very slow in zero knowledge proofs. But now with the advent of all of these arithmetic hash functions, Zcash now makes extensive use of arithmetic hashes. So with Zcash, they not only optimized the proof itself to meet their performance requirements, but they also worked on the program. In contrast, Monero here has really just worked on the program, as seen with as done in curve trees. You know, curve trees just said, here's how you can get a very small program, and because it's very small, the resulting proof is very fast, even if the proof itself isn't the fastest. So we could definitely discuss moving to other proofs. There was a work that said how you could instantiate curve trees over Halo 2. And while that was an interesting work, unfortunately, because Halo 2 doesn't support Peterson vector commitments, you do have to redo that work. You have to define that work inside of the Halo 2 proof. And while the Halo 2 proof may be, so efficient, if you have to re-implement this Peterson vector commitment, which generalized bulletproofs gets for near free, yes, you get the performance benefits of Halo 2, but also the slowdowns of having to redo all of this work. Um, we could also discuss this other interesting work, which was published by research on it was funded by the Monero Community Crowdfunding System, or CCS. It's called Bulletproofs Star. We funded Emmanuel Scala to work on this, where Bulletproof Star is a folding scheme. Folding scheme is a very interesting topic with a lot of very interesting properties for efficiency. Um, but Bulletproof Star is intentionally trying to be a folding scheme that really closely goes back to bulletproofs and the bulletproofs arithmetic circuit statement. So as we could consider Halo 2, we could also consider the work the Monero CCS funded the research of, Bulletproof Star, which attempts to be this, very efficient bulletproof structure. But again, as I said for Halo 2, Bulletproof Star doesn't support Peterson vector commitments. And because Bulletproof Star doesn't inherently support Peterson vector commitments, we would give up how they're effectively free with generalized bulletproofs, and we would have to implement them inside of Bulletproof Star at some cost. So while we can definitely discuss completely replacing the proof with these more efficient constructions, um, we would need a solution that's so efficient that losing this effectively for free Peterson vector commitments is still a worthwhile trade-off. And that's going to be tricky to discuss and find, but there are some candidates that we could look to in the future. Additionally, as we discussed earlier, there are some options that we could discuss, for 10% faster, or maybe there was this one later proposal that I brought up just a month ago. And obviously, as I brought it up just a month ago, it isn't something that we can seriously consider. No, we have this in front of us. We want to move forward with this, be done with it, and actually deploy the FCMP++ upgrade. But if we're discussing the infinite future and potential research avenues, I mentioned a proposal that I think may enable shrinking the proof size by about 25%, and that could be really interesting. So there's definitely, improvements we can make to generalized bulletproofs, and there are other proofs entirely that we can discuss. But the main thing about generalized bulletproofs was the specific feature which really hasn't been seen elsewhere, and how that works to our advantage for this specific problem statement.
Makes sense. Makes sense. By using something that organizes the data better for you to then use efficiently, as opposed to having a really fast initial process, but then having to pick up a bunch of pieces to that would be
Yeah.
slow. Makes sense. Um, well, those are the questions I had. Do you have any other, items you want to mention on generalized bulletproofs?
Um, no, I feel like that's honestly been a really comprehensive overview of the history of them and how Monero has worked to formalize them and how we're still considering potential improvements for the future, not for now, but for the future. And also how, all the pieces come together with regards to the quote unquote IPA, but also the arithmetic circuit and how that's kind of the underlying backbone of the full chain membership proofs we're discussing. And of course, the great work that's been done by the authors of the Curve Trees paper and also by Aaron Piker and the people currently over at CipherStack, such as Brandon Goodall, and how we are doing our best to ensure that this is functional and that we have reviewed it and are confident in its security and that it's been implemented with the implementations audited so we can be fully confident in them as we move forward to actually deploying the full chain membership proofs plus upgrade for Monero.
Sounds great. Well, thank you, Luke Parker, for joining today. And thanks to the listener for listening to this first episode of Plain Text by Magic Grants. Let us know what you want us to cover next. I know this is just one component of Monero's full chain membership proof plus plus upgrade. Generalized bulletproofs are just one part. So we can go ahead and do this for all the other parts that are similarly involved in Monero FCMP plus plus and other related topics. Other ideas that we have include post-quantum security and privacy, finality layers, and other consensus related things, Monero light wallets. Really, the sky's the limit. We wanted to just be able to start a new space to have regular discussions about some of these bigger, more complicated topics to handle, not just for Monero specifically, but also for anything that we're interested in talking about, whether it's like Bitcoin private transaction broadcast or anything Ethereum related as well. It's all whatever we want to talk about and we find interesting. So thank you, Luke, again. I'm sure you'll be on future episodes because there's a lot of fun stuff to talk about together. And thanks again for listening. We'll catch you next time.
Thank you.